coming today. Salinas' history is rich and deep, as we will find in the next 10 or 15 minutes. With me is Dr. Carol McKibben. We celebrate Carol because she put in hours, thousands of hours into years, meetings, research, and the kind of depth that it comes with really well put together history. I think she's breaking barriers with her book, Salinas, A History of Race and Resiliency in an Agricultural City. And today we have a very special opportunity to listen to Carol in featuring the Chamber of Commerce in its role and as featured in the book in Salinas' history. So Dr. McKibben's authored many books, and I think as she was sharing just a little bit ago, she's working on her next. There was remarks on the terrific work done for Seaside. She lives in Carmel. She raised her children in the area. She's been here more than 30 years. And of course, I'm sorry, Jim, but she is a Stanford Cardinal. So
my condolences.
We're very happy to celebrate
Mine
Carol.
too.
You're in Berkeley, aren't you?
Well, I went to graduate school at Berkeley, so I'm...
All right, that's okay.
Oh, got a double whammy.
Forgiven. I didn't say that.
So please help me in welcoming Dr. Carol McKibben.
Thank you again, Steve, for inviting me to participate in this great event that honors the work of the Chamber of Commerce in Salinas historically and today. But I have to call out three people in this room without whom I couldn't have written the book. First, of course, Jim Bogart. We all know Jim. But he gave me access to the records in the Growers Shipper Association basement that were not available prior to this. And it really helped me understand Salinas' history at some pivotal moments in time, the 30s and the 70s. And that was absolutely critical. And thank you. Tom Taft, without whom nothing could have been done. He helped me navigate the records in the chamber, but he also so diplomatically helped me get into the material at Monterey History Society, which was really a closed door for about a year. And he was always there for me. He found photographs. He helped all of my students, who now love you, in their papers about Salinas. And last but not least, Ann Lynch, who came over to my house, or we met in the parking lot here, with a box of materials from her family that really her grandparents, great-grandparents, go all the way back to the beginning. And I began to feel like it was Forrest Gump here. Every time there was a new event in the city or a new moment of import, there was a leech there. And that is absolutely true for the history of the Salinas Chamber of Commerce. So I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the role that this organization played in Salinas' history. It formed during the Progressive Era, which we sort of mark as the late 1880s and 90s through the 1920s. Actually, it ended in 1918. And it was fundamentally formed as a business organization, but that belies its equally significant place in Salinas as a safe place for minority groups and for women, as a mediator in labor disputes that did not always favor growers or business owners, and as the ultimate city booster. The Chamber performed a critical role in making Salinas an important destination in the state of California for business, for government, and for culture from the very first years of the 20th century forward. Industrial and business development, as well as tourism associated with agriculture, always associated with agriculture, and with Salinas's prominence as the county seat, defined Salinas in the new century. The Chamber created an advertising committee in 1926 that extended its reach to other California municipalities, as well as cities and towns throughout the nation, and even into Canada. And all of that effort drew attention to Salinas as a regional tourist and event center for both government and business, taking full advantage of its position as county seat and the largest population center. and the Central Coast. 1929, also the year of the Great Depression, was a pivotal year for the Chamber. It had its highest membership ever in 1929 with 350 members. Among other accomplishments, it brought multiple conventions, meetings, and events to the city. Arguably, Salinas' most important annual happening and identity marker was Big Week, or the Salinas Rodeo, as everybody knows, which every July exemplified the strategies of the Chamber to highlight this city. At the invitation of the Salinas Chamber of Commerce in 1929, over 100 representatives arrived in Salinas from all over the United States and Canada. And they organized themselves into this umbrella group, the Rodeo Association of America. And that would coordinate their respective events so that they didn't conflict on the calendar. The president of the Salinas Chamber of Commerce pointed out, "We feel Salinas deserves a just amount of credit in procuring this national convention and having our secretary, Mr. Fred McGarger, who is also the editor and publisher of the Salinas Daily Index, which became the Californian, elected to the office of secretary for this national organization." So in this way, Salinas, through the chamber, ensured that their city remained a focal point, not just in the region, but also in the state, in the nation, and even internationally. Dr. E.J. Leach, a local dentist and
Grandfather.
Grandfather, was elected to the city council in 1928 and then served as mayor for the next 12 years with one little interlude. He led the effort to make the rodeo culturally inclusive and served stints as its president until 1956. Although his father had once advocated for strict tariff protections and restrictive immigration law, as Anne helped me understand through a little note that he had written, which was aimed at excluding Chinese people and ended up as a very important backdrop to the Chinese Exclusion Acts. Dr. Leach became a crucial mediator in most of the labor disputes of that decade and beyond. His work for the Salinas Rodeo centered on bringing every entity of Salinas into the planning and coordination of Big Week, making it a central part of belonging in Salinas and ensuring that groups who were marginalized both economically and politically felt that they were part of the community, not apart from it. And I heard this over and over again, both in narrative accounts and in written accounts. Neighborhoods were racially segregated here, but this was a defining event, as were many others that brought people together culturally, and the Chamber of Commerce led the way through Dr. Leach. The Chamber worked hand in hand with the business community, regular citizens, ethnic organizations, the Grower-Shipper Association, and the Central Labor Council, the organization for all the unions in town, most of whom were also chamber members. And that's something that's not always well known. They all worked on the rodeo together and so many other cultural events and celebrations as significant moments unifying the city, exemplified by their presence in the parade with all these very carefully designed floats and pageants. Every year, the Grower-Shipper Association and the Central Labor Council sponsored prizes of several $100s for rodeo championships, for one thing. The Salinas Chamber made sure that all of these floats showed the importance both of ethnic inclusion and the identity of Salinas as an agriculturally based municipality, particularly during the lettuce era. They requested that floats really focus and use that as a theme. The GSA and the Central Coast Labor Council became partners in this effort to create a traveling agricultural exhibit, and that's also something not well known. Russell Scott, president of the Salinas Chamber in 1929, noted, during the year, the Chamber of Commerce had the occasion to work on several projects jointly with the Labor Council of Salinas, and I compliment them for their very worthwhile effort in investigating and reporting on conditions of labor. So there was a lot of conversation and working together with the Chamber serving as the moderator. In the 1930s, the Salinas Chamber of Commerce attempted to strike a balance between the growing numbers of diverse groups in Salinas. Members decided purposefully to get along with one another, something we don't do enough today. The Chamber provided an important meeting ground. So I'm going to quote here. The matter of better service and friendly relations between the Filipino labor, Japanese labor, and American farmers was discussed at the request of a Mr. Alcantara and a Mr. Agudo, both of whom were contractors. Dr. Wiley Reeves moved that a committee of 7, consisting of 2 Filipinos, 2 Japanese, 2 American farmers, and 1 businessman, be appointed to such a committee. And which suggested to me that because it came from a Filipino American, this was a safe space to talk about race relations, right? They organized here. The Salinas Chamber was not made up of all white people, certainly not all elites. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, it included members of unions and minority groups that kept this important organization representative, even as it was weighed heavily in favor of growers and shippers in the labor disputes of the 30s and again during the 1970s. The fact that these 2 Filipino Americans that I just referred to, raised the issue at all is remarkable, but it suggested the role that the Chamber played as a moderating force. In another example of activism by the Chamber on behalf of labor, when a Mr. Jensen of Wells Fargo Bank, working in partnership with the GSA, advertised for 5,000 new workers in 1934, and he eloquently talked about the advantages of Salinas and the availability of work, the Central Labor Council was horrified, right? This is the Depression. And union members realized that this effort to bring in new workers was intended to depress wages. So the Salinas Chamber of Commerce weighed in and repudiated those ads, forced them to be taken down, and launched a counter campaign in support of the Central Labor Council, that there was no labor shortage in Central California, and that there were between 2 and 3 men, of course, men for every job ready and willing to work. It was significant that the Salinas Chamber of Commerce, usually associated only with business interests rather than workers, included a contingent of union people among its members and openly sided with them over growers and shippers. During the post-war and well into the 1970s, the Chamber played a very significant role in attracting industry to Salinas that might provide year-round employment, which was designed to encourage people to leave the fields and become full-time residents of the city rather than migrant field workers. Multiple family stories from every ethnic group in town credited these new industries with offering high enough paying employment that helped people reach their goals of accumulating wealth through home ownership. So the new industries added significantly to the city's tax base apart from agriculture, a year-round tax base. When Pacific Lincoln Laboratories chose to make Salinas its West Coast headquarters, for example, its representative listed 5 reasons for doing so: transportation, climate, the central location of Salinas in relation to major markets, proximity to the Monterey Peninsula, and, most importantly, reception by members of the Salinas Chamber of Commerce, which had organized a group called the Monterey County Industrial Development that urged new industry to locate here. Indeed, it would appear that Salinas would take every advantage of its location, including this vast surrounding landscape that allowed these new industries room to build and expand. By the 1990s and into the 2000s, when Salinas faced catastrophic economic hardship brought on by this fiscal belt-tightening at both the federal and state level, the chamber supported Mayor Ana Caballero in her effort to raise taxes to maintain city services and keep the libraries open. We're in a very tough financial situation, she announced in something like an understatement, after a really contentious city council meeting in November of 2004 that postponed the decision made in September not to close the libraries, which became really notorious. This is Steinbeck country, closing the libraries. So the city proposed a 50-cent tax increase, which failed. But both measures, the tax increase A and B, were defeated soundly. But all three measures to raise some taxes to make up for the budget shortfall were supported, advocated by the Salinas Chamber of Commerce. So it's known to be a business organization, right? But they were advocating tax increases to support city services. So in conclusion, and I will stop because I love questions, it's all too easy to paint the Chamber of Commerce, or all Chamber of Commerces, with this broad brush of being an organization made up only of business interests. And that would be wrong, because it ignores all the shades of gray, past and present, that show diversity, inclusion, and conscious effort by the Salinas Chamber of Commerce to make positive change in the city. Thank you.
Questions? Sorry, I should facilitate questions. Thank you.
Comment.
Questions, comments. We're very lucky to have Dr. McKibben here, so I'm sure anybody want to comment or offer. I'm not looking right at Ann, but I.
Did I do Dr. Leach justice? I didn't. I mean, he's throughout.
Well, I had not heard that particular story about the chamber, so that's new information for me.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I remember when Don Nucci led that charge to pass a tax measure to save the libraries.
That's right.
And they did the mock funeral down Main Street.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I didn't get everything in the book.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice and cold too.
Chill.
Jesus,
Oh.
it's already chilled and ready for Carol's drink.
I have a quick question. What about Steinbeck Center? You and I spent a lot of time talking about
Yes,
Steinbeck.
we did.
Is that,
and there's an entire chapter.
entire chapter on that? I'll have to read that one.
Entire chapter. And it was contentious, including the narrative account of the Steinbeck Center was contentious. Oh yeah, I think we did that over wine.
We did.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that ought to be a good chapter.
Oh, it was unfortunately, after Anne left, it was hard to remember everything. We did it over a lot of wine. But the important part of that is that it has a very long and convoluted history, and it was an effort to connect Salinas to the tourist industry in Monterey, which is half as valuable as the agricultural industry, right? It failed in that. But it was really an important effort because it was the anchor for Main Street that has led to a completely new understanding and redevelopment. And hopefully, as we progress, there will be more attention paid to the National Steinbeck Center as a really important hallmark of Salinas's identity too. It's educational, as an educational center. So I'm talking with them, and it's had its ups and downs, mostly financial, and mostly because it occupies an odd place in the city's history, right? And the contentious part of it cannot be exaggerated. Yeah.
Any other questions? Comments? Tom?
This is my third book. the first book I wrote really was my doctoral dissertation and focused on immigration and in Monterey among Sicilians who reinvented themselves to create an all-new community in Monterey and suddenly decided that they were Sicilian in the process. So that was kind of fun because I related to about half of them. And it brings up also the issue of insider-outsider, right? That who gets the authority to write these things. And I was very much an insider there, and that was good and bad. Because I was an insider, I was not told a lot of the not so nice stories of the past. I was a daughter of the community, so nobody wanted to talk about things like that. But I had access in ways that I wouldn't have had. So I've learned that we want to be scholars first, and we hope that we're judged on our scholarship, but we're also judged by the way we look and our gender and all those kinds of things. And what you do is the best you can. And you take advantage of the assets that you have, right? So as a trained academic history scholar, I knew what to do to create a narrative, and I wasn't coming at it from an angle that tried to glorify or diminish any particular group. I really wanted to be inclusive. That said, you cannot include every single person. So, or even every single group. You're trying to create a narrative. And I always kind of describe it as if you think about a tapestry with all these beautiful threads, you want them all, right? But you don't want to lose the tapestry either. So not everybody can be there. And that makes me a little bit sad, but I hope I didn't just create a vegetable stew here. It's a story.
Anybody else? Oh, Spencer, yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. So you mentioned your dissertation, and you had mentioned also that your students have been writing a lot of papers on Salinas.
I assigned them.
What?
Yeah, I assigned them.
Oh, you signed it. Is there any place to read some of that? Because I imagine there's a lot. I mean, I've grown up.
Yeah,
my whole life
okay.
and I've
My
always been
dissertation is a book.
Okay.
It's called Beyond Cannery Row, and just like any book, you don't get to pick the title nor the cover, although my Auntie Mary is on the cover. And my second book, to answer your question, is called Racial Beachhead, and it was about the relationship between Fort Ord and this little tiny non-existent town that became a center for civil rights because of Fort Ord, right? My student papers really are not available for public viewing, but they were really important because a lot of those students came from Salinas and did some interviewing here and spoke Spanish fluently. So they could interview people who were not native English speakers better than me. And many of them had family ties here. So once again, they were insiders and they got information that I couldn't have gotten, which I then was able to use. But, I had to sort of weigh all of that too.
Jim, did you?
And Diego's one of my students. Diego, would you want to share your paper with everybody?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
I'll have to revise it, make
Send
sure
your
there's no
paper to him.
typo.
Well, and I have his cell, and we work out together. So
Yeah.
so I'll see you tomorrow at 6, and we'll pass it on. That'd be great.
Yep, we'll take a time, Steve.
Carol, do you touch on the LSL at all?
Oh yeah. The Alisal is.
That was an
front
X,
and center.
because my
Front
dad's
and
side of the
center.
family grew up out there.
Oh yeah, a lot of people grew up out there.
They didn't like the South Salinas girls dating the LSL boys.
There was that. There was a lot of dating going on.
Oh.
A lot of dating because parents can't control everything, as I've learned. So there was a lot of dating. There was a lot of interaction. Things changed a little bit when Alisal High School happened. Because in the past, I'm talking about the 40s and 50s and 60s a little bit, everybody went to Salinas High School.
Right.
It was a great big mixing ground, right? So kids who came out of Alisal were interacting with kids from Salinas High. It was lovely.
Yeah, my dad's senior year is when they started North High.
62.
Yeah. So in the 40s and 50s, it was a different world, right? And a lot of the Dust Bowl kids got a glimpse of a whole different world at Salinas High. And one of my favorite interviewees is, you know, besides Bill Ramsey, Everett Alvarez Jr., who has a, you know, his family story is a very complicated one in Salinas, and it challenges myths of settlement too. So Alisal began as a really multiracial space. Anybody could start their lives there, right? It then changed a little bit because the Dust Bowl migration was so huge that it redefined Alisal, as big migrations often do, and it became a little less open in terms of housing. So there was racial segregation within Alisal at that in the 40s and the 50s. And I know that because I looked at advertisements, which are, well, not hilarious. They were very painful and racist. But they said things like restricted subdivision, right? That was all over the place. And it was all over California and the nation. There's a whole scholarship about this. It was in Alisal too. In Alisal too. And one woman I interviewed who was a school teacher in Alisal and was mentored by Virginia Roque Martin, her heroine, right? Her family was Filipino. Her dad worked in one of these Firestone plant, right? So they saved money to buy a house. A petition was circulated in Alisal against them buying a house. And she was just, you know, it was very hard for her, even today, to talk about that. And that was in 1948. But there was a resistance by Dust Bowl migrants to people of color, all of them. But Everett Alvarez does not remember that. He said, nope. It was all, everybody was together. So, and that kind of brings in sources and methods a little bit. So oral history is fantastic and I just love it, but it's not accurate, ever. It's always about perspective. Memories are really faulty. So everybody had a different perspective of Alisal depending on who you were and when you arrived and if you're still there.
Yeah, a lot of the Chinese markets. Matter of fact, the Jin family, and and I went to school with Jeff Jin, whose family ran the Jin market.
He's front and center. He was very important. He brought up Virginia Roque Martin. He brought her up to the position of superintendent of schools. He was her ally. Yeah, it's a great story. I just loved looking at that. You have to make me cute. Right. I think that's the wrong angle.
You were talking about race restrictions. A lot of the original.
Make me look thin and cute. That's the whole thing.
Okay, look right here.
Thank you.
Oh, there she goes.
Get Steve out of the background.
Lord.
Photo bomb.
There you
Any
go.
further questions or comments?
No double chin.
Tom.
You were talking about the race restricted
Oh, yeah.
areas. There's a lot of original land deeds in Salinas that if you go back and look at those documents, they actually have race restriction
Oh yeah,
covenants
that
built
was,
right into them.
but that was normal.
That's-
That was
in America.
everywhere.
Yeah, it
That's
specifically
America.
says
That's how it was.
You
you
bet.
can't
That's
do
how it was.
this.
We have this image of California as somehow being
But
not
it
like
was-
that. Of course it was like that. There's a great book out called Golden Gates that I recommend because it's a quick read, but it's about housing. And Richard Rothstein's book, what is his book called? Something Law is in the title. He just won a Pulitzer, I think, a few years ago. And then my colleague from Berkeley, and I think that it's not fair that everybody thinks Richard Rothstein is so great and not David Freund, who wrote a better book, I think, on the history of racially restricted covenants. But they are there, absolutely. In the 80s and 90s, it was even hard to move into South Salinas if you were not a white person.
So I just want to thank everybody, especially Carol.
Thank you for having me.
I do have the Sharpie. We have the books, thanks to
I use
Downtown
a
Book
fountain
and Downtown Book and Sound. So I want you to sign these two if you can.
I'm
And
glad to do
you know,
it.
she's available if you need. Does that'll work or whatever?
No,
but
it
you have
won't.
a better pen.
Because I
Okay.
have a better pen.
Okay.
But I won't.
I just have to acknowledge, you know, the giants in this room that love and support history. You know, Rodney, your comments and leading up to this, your leadership as our chair, just supporting Carol, the book, this part and this role of the chamber. Thank you. And, you know, certainly Jim, in your role with Grower Shipper, and Tom, practically, I mean, you were and still are probably the chamber historian. Your service to the Monterey County Historical Society, the city, and everything. Thank you. And Ann, there's probably a lot more I could learn about you. And I only know that much. So just to everybody else that took the time to attend today, thank you. Does everybody feel like